I'm positive I played this game wrong, but we'll get to that. MechWarrior 5 Clans released end of 2024 and is mechanically very similar to MechWarrior 5 Mercenaries, but with upgraded graphics and a different slant on the universe. Clans has us take command of a group of fresh cadets during an invasion of the Inner Sphere, i.e. the near-Earth planets where most of the franchise takes place, by the eponymous Clans, an exiled group of elite warriors who fled known space several thousand years ago and have been gradually developing their own military society, complete with way better mechs than those lame-o spheroids. It has mostly everything I loved about Mercenaries, the excellent tractor-esque design of mechs, and that real stompy, mechanical feel to the combat. But also quite a bit of changes that didn't really move me, or worse, made me want to stop playing. The biggest, most immediate change is the removal of the entire mercenary career system, the high-level self-directed campaigning that really drove the last entry. Here it's reconfigured as a series of story missions that we complete in sequence, receiving static rewards, and the entire game plays much differently on account of that. The best bits of Mercenaries combat are still here: shredding armor, structural damage, focusing down specific weapons clusters, and the multiple methods to score a kill being the utmost. But there's some issues in the combat. Our bot squad mates are just breathtakingly stupid at times, and can only really be effectively utilized through extreme micromanaging, or forming gun lines so they won't suicide charge or block each other's shots. The command system here is not sophisticated enough to handle the missions breezily. You can designate specific places for bots to stand, or build them a queue of targets, but not both. Or just have them follow you around. I wished it had something closer to a CRPG's behavioral settings, letting you choose if squad mates would mirror your targets, keep range, close in, etc. It's not an issue if you're playing co-op, but it's pretty rough on single player. Most of my issues with the game stem from the basic design philosophy of the mission. Do you remember in Mercenaries how they introduced repair bays and then used them in like 2 missions? Well, Clans has them. All the time, every mission. Because the missions mostly take around 20 to 30 minutes on your first go, and we seem to face upwards of 30 mechs on most missions. Some of the final ones took me over an hour to complete. There's no checkpoints or in-mission saving, which is just annoying. Especially considering the dozen or so times I had to exit missions because an objective failed to trigger, or a mech got eaten by terrain. The earlier missions are pretty fun, with a variety of scouting and evasion objectives, and the light versus light mechs have exactly the right feeling of being tanky, but not tedious to resolve. In those early missions, the repair bays feel like a natural way to keep your guys in the game, allowing you to get in close, take hits, and weave around. The latter half missions, on the other hand, are gauntlets, built with the clear expectation that you will keep your star at full combat capability through the entire mission. If you get unlucky and a single squad mate charges ahead and gets blasted to pieces, you should just restart. Repair bays only repair armor, so if a friendly loses a weapon, he's effectively dead, and you're underpowered, which will almost inevitably snowball to more losses as you fail to focus fire enemies before they focus fire you. These missions are relentless, wave after wave of tanky heavies punctuated by massive bosses that are little more than damage soaks with glowing weak spots. And then my least favorite part, additional waves of enemies after the bosses. It's a constant battle of attrition, and most of the time you're fighting against the friendly AI more than the enemies. There were a few times when this resulted in great moments, taking down the last enemy in a slowly limping mech with a single working autocannon. But there was more time spent frustrated stemming from this design. The length of missions also doesn't help the weapon balancing. Energy weapons are a clear winner with their infinite ammo and generally slightly better damage. Ballistics are nice, but the missions have somewhat erratic ammo drops, so they can wind up being completely useless for large chunks. And I barely used missiles once I caught on to how spread out their damage was. Focusing fire on specific points is king in this game, and energy weapons pretty clearly win in that regard. I also found it much harder to play as a close-range brawler in this one, which, well, I'd say my mech power fantasy does involve the robots punching one another. But the attrition-based mission design takes this from risky to actively stupid, except on the easiest difficulties. I did end up playing a chunk on the easiest difficulty, and it was actually a lot of fun. I said in my Mercenaries review that I wish the game would give me a reason to bring light mechs along once I've unlocked the heavy hitters, and it still doesn't. I really think this game would have benefited from some sort of mid-mission reinforcement option to let you keep a B team of lighter mechs that you swap in when a heavy goes down, or even just to wait the incoming spawns based on how many mechs you've still got standing, rather than gearing every individual fight for a full complement in a game where it's so easy to accidentally lose a squaddy. As far as the actual campaign, the entire context of battling has changed since the last game. In the Cloud Jaguar story, we can often full heal between missions without straining any resources. We're given an abundance of resources, in fact. I don't think this game needed so many currencies. The honor currency we get between level ups will always just be used to purchase the next unlock from the extremely linear upgrade line of mechs. It feels like they could have completely axed it and just given us the mechs directly on level up, which might have put some pressure on utilizing the Kerensky credits more effectively. Instead, I just ended up with massive pools of both monies the entire game. Ultimately, you can take a step back and consider the mech-specific experience and pilot-specific experience as currencies. This game just has too many pools of resources that are each hyper-specific to one type of upgrade, and it kills any tension that should arise from the allocation of resources between all the options. And, speaking of which, there's also too many overlapping systems that don't have good, interesting rewards. I.e. pilot experience versus mech experience versus research, all are essentially just giving you context-specific percent boosts to stats or items, instead of anything that feels meaningful. Another issue does arise from the research system. It seems to steer the player towards investing heavily in one specific weapon type, and then just slamming as many of that weapon on every mech as possible. There isn't a ton of weapon variety in the Battletech games to start with, so limiting it even further like this makes the mech options feel very samey. There is a new mech customization system, which I thought at first was a little confusing, but then turned out to be really confusing. This is where I played the game wrong for the first half or so. The clans don't use battle mechs, they use omni mechs, which are more customizable. So when we buy an omni mech, it has a stock configuration. Then after we get some experience, we can unlock new presets for that mech. Each preset has a distinct loadout of specific limbs with specific hardpoints and armor. I took this to be an attempt to streamline the mech choosing process, almost like a standard class in Call of Duty or something. I assumed they were pre-tuned to be ready to go. I was wrong. The presets are largely middling, not enough armor, too many weapon types with too little ammo for each. Then I had a moment of clarity. Duh, it is a MechWarrior game. We can customize the presets, changing out heat sinks for ammo, switching weapons. There's a ton of variability here. It did throw me at first that larger weapons require multiple slots on the same limb, so even if a preset says it has 6 ballistic slots, they may not be arranged in a way that lets you use that giant cannon you've been eyeing. It felt a little odd to have this additional restriction when there's already the weight and heat considerations, so I'm assuming there's some tabletop reason for this. I also didn't actually realize, until I was partway into my second campaign, the individual limb sections of the Omnimechs can be freely mixed and matched when you're creating a new loadout, letting you customize the hardpoints even more. Having 3 layers of specificity in the mech lab is kind of bewildering to me, but I'll admit, it was probably all explained in a tutorial that I completely skipped. It does feel like a system that's one refinement away from being really good. It's fun as you're progressing up, constantly shifting out your lineup and tweaking your star to see what the AI does okay with. And in the early game, there's slightly more variety with those scouting missions and mixed tonnage engagements. But eventually you get to a point where it stops feeling challenging and starts feeling lazy and bloated, throwing multiple assault class mechs at you with long times to kill, and you really no longer have any choice but to grab a full star of the heaviest mech, kit them for high armor and energy weapons, and hope for the best. I ended up turning the difficulty down on the final stretch of the game. I think the late game also suffers from a drive towards mech standardization. One of the reasons the lower levels are fun is because so many opponents have obvious drawbacks that allows us to use interesting counters. I always think of the Hunchback, the mech with the massive cannon stuffed in its shoulder. You can strafe it the opposite way or focus fire and take that cannon out, leaving it defanged so you can focus on more pressing enemies. There's a few options. Plus, in the beginning, the game is more often pitting us against mechs that are technically heavier than us but with pre-existing damage, allowing us to get rapid kills if we can exploit their wounds properly. But as we near the end, we're facing only heavy or assault class, they come with full health, and the mech variants have more symmetrically distributed weapons. So these fights devolve into going for the torso or the head as quickly as possible. Since the enemy is no longer lopsided, taking out an arm or a leg feels like a strategic blunder. Instead of losing 80% of the Hunchback's damage potential by taking out its shoulder, any individual limb of an assault mech is doing comparatively little, and takes much longer to burn through. There's a few strategies that absolutely dominate, and honestly I just did not like them. Gearing for long-range combat and shooting enemies that aren't really able to respond feels gamey in a Far Cry way. But at the same time, there's something unsatisfying about just immediately turning every mech into a laser boat. There's something just off enough about the balancing in this game to really drag it down, especially towards the end. Some failure of pacing, some problem with balancing that discourages diverse weapon choice. The upgraded graphics are pretty much fine. I think these new Unreal Engine 5 Uncanny Valley faces will probably be remembered about as fondly as the Oblivion faces. They're all carved from cheese. I also noticed that the fire effects are from a very ambitious Doom mod. There's some weird physics issues here too, with mechs occasionally becoming completely weightless when they die, or becoming very still in a T-pose way instead of a powered-down way. I also really wish we didn't clip right through their corpses. It ruins the illusion of being in a mech that we can't just grind everything apart under our heavy tread. Another issue is visibility. There's so much HUD, and so many atmospheric effects that I spent most of this game leaning way in and squinting. Something about the scale of everything also seems off still. Maybe it's these weird thin trees that should logically be 50 feet tall. Maybe it's that a mech the size of a skyscraper is completely concealed in fog from 300 yards. It feels more like we're a guy in a miniaturized world than a giant robot on an alien planet. There's also some fun bugs scattered here and there, but mostly not so fun bugs that force a mission restart. I don't know anything about the MechWarrior setting except for what I've gleaned from the games, and I felt like this actually did a good job of introducing me to the clan's whole thing. They provide enough context for the various slang that I caught on pretty quickly to meanings, and there's enough asides to paint a decent picture of how life in the clans differs from the spheroids. I really love spheroid as an insult. For example, all the clan's MechWarriors are genetically engineered, and they have a sort of bartering challenge system that individual clans use to vie for prestige and resources. Contractions are basically slurs, and one of your squad mates is constantly getting chewed out for saying wheel and don't. I love that they don't use any contractions, but most of their foreign language sounding words are just military portmanteaus along the lines of Op 4. I gather that the clan invasion arc was cooked up in the 90s, and at times you can really tell that you're playing the antagonists in someone else's story. The way everything is set up, the clans have better warriors, better weapons, more and better mechs. It's really only possible that they lose because of the insane incompetence you'd expect of the evil empire, opposed by the flashes of self-sacrifice from underdogs that I am assuming had last names and histories. Like failing to account for a succession plan in case the main general, who leads from an active battleship, should happen to be hit by a kamikaze bomber, causing the entire invasion to be put on hold for over a year while everyone goes home to talk about it. Or leaving the entire war zone in the command of some guy who disgraced himself utterly like 5 minutes ago. I didn't really care for the main characters of the Smoke Jaguar campaign. Their actions didn't really feel believably supported by what happens in the missions or their hinted cultural upbringing. There's a bit of an abrupt about-face so the game can lead to 2 possible endings, but neither of them really involve the group facing the problem. I also played through the Ghost Bears expansion, and I'll talk about that too. The Ghost Bears campaign has much better pacing than the default one. Resources were throttled way down, and active mechs now suffer a huge penalty to repair, forcing you to shuffle your active units and bench units between missions, and you overall receive fewer mechs. And they're randomized too, meaning you may not even be able to form an assault gun line by the time you're hitting the higher tier enemies. There's still a problem with the constant boss fights, which are either uninteresting damage sponges or tedious, dangerous damage sponges. Elementals were added in, hypermobile battle suits, providing both an interesting scouting and distraction option, as well as a terrifying enemy combatant that swarms after you. And the new missions take place on much more interesting maps, including a few spaceborne fights that present unique and sometimes grating challenges. I played through the Ghost Bears campaign on Trueborn, the highest difficulty, and it was in fact very difficult. You really learn the ins and outs of the AI when taking on a challenge like this, and I really did not like how it steered me. I failed a lot of missions as I retooled and refit my mechs to match the challenges. Essentially, the friendly mechs are extremely heat-averse, and too stupid to avoid being shot. But we need them to be highly survivable and able to bring guns to bear throughout the entire 40-minute missions. So the strategy is to build artillery. Heavy armor, either long-range lasers or 1 or 2 long-range guns with enough ammo to let them fire consistently. And then you form a gun line somewhere with a huge firing lane. Take your fastest mech, trigger spawns, and kite them back. Over and over. Until you fail to trigger a cutscene and have to restart the mission. There's some other options that work with more intense micromanagement, like constantly shifting between mechs, firing everything to get them to max heat, and then moving on to your next mech. But it's pretty clear the friendly AI in this game would need a massive tune-up to match the challenges presented. I'm sure it's fine on co-op though. Maybe someday I'll have friends. Overall, I was disappointed in MechWarrior 5 Clans. It feels like a lot of good ideas are here, but they either needed more refinements, or in some cases probably shouldn't have been changed from the previous entry. I did play this immediately after a weapons balancing patch was made, but it felt like a majority of the weapons were bizarrely ineffective. Maybe a few more patches will come out and turn this into a great game, improving the AI and encouraging more diverse mech building. But that won't help me, the guy who already finished the game. On the trusty pain scale, I'd give this one a very painful. The main campaign took around 20 hours, and the max difficulty DLC took me around 30, even though it was only 12 missions. The early game was a lot of fun, but once mech tonnage hits its max, everything becomes very repetitive and slow. Well, that's all for my 43rd review. Thanks for tuning in. See ya.